Can I just go to the question on Notice 166? This relates to the issue about Essendon and Melbourne airports, the concerns about loss of separation for a period of 3 hours. The answer to question on Notice on 166, the question was asked was, at the time ATSB reviewed Air Services Cirrus report, the number, was it aware that approximately 3 hours had elapsed between the time the reported breakdown of communication occurred and the time was detected and corrected? The answer was no, and that's not a criticism because I think the Cirrus had very little information contained in it. There was subsequently a REPCON, and I'm basing this on information that air traffic controllers and pilots who have been very concerned about that particular incident. What they're concerned about is that the ATSB stated that it reviewed the radar data using WebTrack, which is publicly available on the Air Services Australia website. Can I tell you, those that I've spoken to have been quite concerned about that. I think WebTrack, a journalist told me this morning, WebTrack is what they use to track the PM's plane. Anyone can, it's publicly available. It's been described to me as a bit of an infotainment site because it has all sorts of disclaimers on WebTrack that you can't use it. It may include inaccuracies or typographical errors. The WebTrack provides visualisation of the traffic flow in and around the airspace, is what their website says, saying that it's uncertain and subject to source of error. Do not use this for safety requirements and the like. It's quite a comprehensive disclaimer.
Yes. And I understand the disclaimer, Senator.
Will the ATSB consider going, are you satisfied the WebTrack was used, given the concerns that have been expressed about that 3 hour period of aircraft taking off at runways from Essendon and Melbourne? Has the ATSB looked at the radar tapes in this rather than simply rely on WebTrack?
No, Senator. So perhaps we take a step back and differentiate, as we should, REPCON from our normal investigation work.
Sure.
So if this had been an ATSB investigation, we would have got the tapes, analysed them, taken a close look at them, understood them, checked them.
But you haven't done that?
No, because we did not open an investigation into this event, Senator.
Right, why not though? Because I've got air traffic controllers and pilots saying there was a period of 3 hours where there was no communication between the two towers, as there should have been between Essendon and Melbourne. That's correct. You accept there was a 3 hour period?
Yes, Senator.
And you had runways, one in a southerly and one in a westerly direction where the aircraft could have intersected?
Well, there was the possibility of it, Senator, yes.
Well, you know, we're talking about aircraft flying at a few hundred k's an hour each. That's the possibilities can be quite significant in terms of risk management, can't it?
It can, Senator.
Right.
So we looked at the initial Cirrus report, and based on that and other information, didn't think we, in terms of the limited priorities, limited resources we have to review a whole range of air traffic control events, that this was one that required our attention. We then received a REPCON. The REPCON is designed, Senator, not as a basis for our formal investigation, but as a basis for us to review a safety concern raised by someone, to bring it to the attention of the relevant organisation, in this case Air Services, and to bring the results, if necessary, to the attention of the regulator.
But Mr. Donald, there was a REPCON, wasn't there?
There was.
Yeah. So there was eventually there was a REPCON. You can still look at radar tapes. They're available, aren't they?
I'm trying to explain, Senator, and I apologise for not doing it well enough. REPCON is not the same as an investigation.
I know that, but you make the decision as to whether there's an investigation or not.
That's correct, Senator.
Right. So you don't think that the REPCON warranted an investigation, given that there was a 3 hour period when there wasn't adequate communication or appropriate communication between Melbourne and the Essendon Towers?
Yeah. Our key question, Senator, is understanding what is potentially systemic and what might be relevant in terms of future safety.
Sure, but is
so under the REPCON, we reviewed, as we were required to, worked with Air Services to understand the nature of the event, what led to it, which was a breakdown in communications and a breakdown in their system with a particular human factor, and we were advised of the steps that have been taken to reduce the likelihood of this occurring in the future.
Mr. Doll, I'm really alarmed by your answer in this respect. There are two airports close to each other, one landing, one runway in a southerly, one in a westerly. Pilots, air traffic controllers say that unless you've got that constant communication between the two, there's a real issue when those particular runways are operating. There was a RepCon initiated. What these air traffic controllers have put to me and pilots is that there was a real risk, there was a loss of separation assurance in respect of that. Isn't that something that would concern you as the safety investigators in this country?
If there had been a loss of separation assurance, Senator, yes, that would be.
But you don't know, though, do you? You've relied on this infotainment site, WebTrack.
No, Senator. We reviewed the material and we discussed it.
But you haven't reviewed the radar. You haven't reviewed the radar tapes.
No, we asked Air Services to review the radar tapes.
And you won't review them. So you've relied on Air Services. You won't review the radar tapes.
That's the nature of the RepCon system, Senator. Yes.
Right. So you've got the power to review the radar tapes, haven't you?
I'm sorry?
You've got the authority to review the radar tapes.
If I open an investigation, yes, I have.
But you're not going to open up an investigation into a 3-hour period when there would have been dozens and dozens of takeoffs and landings of these two runways as to whether you should look at it.
From what we understand of our review of the RepCon, including the fact that, the best of our understanding, there was no loss of separation assurance.
But how do you know there was no loss of
priorities
separation?
For investigation, we did not see this as a high priority.
But Mr. Dolan, you do not know whether there was a loss of separation assurance or not, do you? In the absence of looking at the radar tapes, in the absence of the ATSB looking at the radar tapes, you have no idea whether there was a loss of separation assurance or not, which is a very serious issue.
We have worked in a range of investigations, Senator, with Air Services, and we, over a considerable period of time, have confidence in what they provide to us in terms of assessment of losses of separation and loss of separation assurance. We asked the question of Air Services, we asked them to review the tapes, and we, as a result, took it that there was not a loss of separation.
Are these radar tapes publicly available? If, say, an independent expert wanted to look at these tapes, are they publicly available? Only you have access to them. Only the regulator would have it.
They're actually held by Air Services. I'm not quite sure for how long, Senator. Right. They're not publicly available. We have access to them where we need them for the purposes of investigation.
So you didn't know initially that there was a 3-hour breakdown in communication between the two towers, did you?
No, Senator.
No. And have you checked the WebTrack, that publicly available website, which has all sorts of disclaimers as to its accuracy? Have you actually checked the WebTrack for the entire 3 hours out of the two runways?
No, Senator.
You haven't even done that?
We reviewed WebTrack to understand the context of the RepCon, the concern that related to a potential loss of separation or separation assurance in this event.
Let's leave the radar tapes to one, which seems to me to be the gold standard. But in respect of WebTrack, with all its flaws, did you actually do an analysis of WebTrack for the 3 hours, that 3-hour period where there was a loss of communications? Have you actually done that?
No, Senator.
You haven't even done that? Will you? It's publicly available. I know when Senator Rice asked questions and estimates about some matters relating to noise complaints, I think you said that you could go back a number of years with WebTrack. So I'm just remembering, I think there was some, I don't want to be verbaling Senator Rice, but Melbourne, yeah, I think there were some issues.
You're starting to do circle work, son?
No, I'm not trying to do circle work. This is important that the ATSB has, will the ATSB at least look at WebTrack to see whether there was a loss of separation assurance, the publicly available information out of the two airports for that 3-hour period?
We thought it was more effective, Senator, to ask Air Services to take a look at the tapes and to provide us with their view as to whether there had been a loss of separation assurance.
How long would it take you to look at what Senator Xenophon's requesting? How long would it take you to look at that information? A couple of hours?
Possibly, Senator. It
Well,
would need to be done by someone with air traffic control experience so they can understand it, and we have a range of priorities that we've got our limited air traffic control expertise focused on. This is a matter of the management of limited resources.
Could you please, Chief Commissioner, take on notice whether the ATSB will be taking this matter any further, at the very least, to look at the web track for that 3-hour period out of the Essendon and Melbourne airports, and also whether we'll look at radar tapes. And also there's a fundamental issue. It appears what's been put to me is that Air Services didn't give you the full story initially.
In terms of not understanding, not being informed of a 3-hour period, that's true, Senator. Dr.
Doesn't that worry you? Doesn't that worry you, Mr. Dolan?
It's nice to clarify something, Senator. Stuart Godley, General Manager of Strategic Capability. We did have one of our air traffic control investigators. She did review the whole 3 hours. So generally, what happened after the RepCon, we got back to Air Services. They reviewed the tapes and said there was no loss of separation or loss of separation assurance. Our ATC investigator then reviewed the 3 hours. She determined that there was a potential loss of separation between two aircraft, but due to the limitations of web tracker, she couldn't be sure. She went back to Air Services.
QED. So there's a loss of separation. So
no.
was
She said potential. We went back to Air Services and asked them specifically to check those two aircraft, and they confirmed that there was no loss of separation between those aircraft.
But you didn't check the radar tapes independently, did you?
No, because as Mr. Dolan pointed out.
All right. I might put some questions on notice and ask for the documents. Thank you.